Now, I'm going to get on with my talk, which I call RV101. It's kind of an introduction to remote viewing, at least my take. You have to understand this is coming from my perspective. I'm trying to make it as broad-based as possible, but not everything I say will everybody agree with. And that's understandable, and that's normal in a situation such as this. And at the end, I'll give people time to set the record straight if they think I've misrepresented something. Okay, most of you, or many of you at least, ask the question first. How many here have been through or participated in some kind of remote viewing training situation or course or whatever? Let me see hands. So we got a good representation. There's quite a few out there. That's good. You know, this is probably the largest group of people like us, whatever that is, that have been together in one place at one time under one roof, or even under several roofs, as far as I know. So welcome here, and I appreciate you guys showing up, and I think it'll be a good experience for all of us. Okay, most of us heard about remote viewing when, in 1995, it was the Nightline program came on, and one night, I think it was the 30th of November, and started talking about this bizarre psychic espionage stuff that the government had been doing. And of course, what came to most people's minds was probably something along these lines. Well, today, what are we? It's still the afternoon. Today, I'm going to not answer this following question. This is a question I'm not going to answer, but I'm going to try. I'm sure this has been on your minds. Okay? And I'll disentangle a few things, but it's not possible to resolve everything, but that's why we're here to ask questions and all that stuff during the course of the conference. First of all, I'm going to treat the what rather than the where we came from, which was, I think it's mentioned that in the brochure, in the program. All of you have heard various things about remote viewing. Many of you have heard lots of confusing things and claims and statements made about remote viewing. You've heard it called all sorts of different things. Well, remote viewing is just like out of body, or it's just being clairvoyant, or it's astral projection, or it's some kind of ESP, or what. And that, there are some truth and perhaps not a little confusion to some of these things. Let me tell you my understanding of what remote viewing is. But to do that, I have to start with rather what it isn't. Sometimes it's easier to define something by what it isn't than what it is. So, let me go over a couple of these. First of all, remote viewing is not video in the head. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you get the standard Hollywood picture of someone who is a psychic. And they get these, the cameras doing all these weird things and fading in and out. But basically, it's like the psychic's perceiving a murder. And they get the license plate of the car. They get a full image of the murderer, They know the victim's home address, his date of birth. You get all that kind of stuff, right? Remote viewing is not like that. I don't know anything that is like that other than Hollywood. The experience of remote viewing is much less defined and definite than that. It's an intuitive process, involves perception in a fairly nebulous kind of a way, particularly when you're first starting out. But we'll talk about that a little more at length. Okay, it's not clairvoyance, exactly. Clairvoyance plays a role. Now, in the strict sense of clairvoyance, it involves a visual experience. Well, people say it's called remote viewing. That must mean it's a visual experience. And that is somewhat true. There are visual experiences involved in it. But it involves the other senses as well. It involves all kinds of perceptual channels that normal vision does not. It's kind of a cocktail of different experiences. There's even a little bit of telepathy mixed in with it. It's a kind of an eclectic mix that is very effective when it is used, when it is pursued properly. It is not channeling. As far as we know, there's no external, whatever, other dimensional entities involved in this. No one's come to talk to me from the other world or anything like that. There are some theories of what channeling is like or about that might tie in a little bit with remote viewing, ones that don't involve other entities, but just people perceiving that there's other entities when it's really their subconscious at work or something like that. Now, on that definition, there might be a relation between channeling and remote viewing, but in the strict sense of it, they are not the same. Okay, it's not an out-of-body experience. The experience of remote viewing is dramatically different than the reported experience of being out of body and having an out-of-body experience. Doesn't mean, again, that there's not some connection somewhere. They may be either end of a continuum of experience. It's hard to say. There's still a lot of research to be done in that area. So these are just some of the things that remote viewing is not. Let's talk for a moment about what it might be. First, we have this definition. This is still, boy, that's not very clear, is it, guys? This is right out of the Defense Intelligence Agency Manual, which I was the major author of, but I didn't make this up. I got this from other documents. You know, they say in the Army that there was only one document ever written, and everybody else copied that for the rest of the time. That's kind of what happened with this. I borrowed this definition from somebody else who borrowed it from somebody else, but this is generally it. Acquisition, description by mental means of information blocked from ordinary perception by distance, shielding, or time. In other words, perceiving things in a non-ordinary way that you have no other sensory connection with than some sort of mental connection, which we cannot yet define any further than that. Now, that in and of itself can kind of describe a lot of different so-called psi methodologies or psi phenomena. Remote viewing has a few added things that make it more what it is, and one of those I've added here. It should include in some way a mechanism or process to control mental noise. Now, let's talk about mental noise for a moment. Anybody know what I'm talking about when I say mental noise? There ought to be a whole handful or a whole house full of arms out there. You guys know what mental noise is, right? We call it a number of things. Probably the most widely used term is analytical overlay. What we're talking about there is that the conscious analytical part of the mind takes over when one starts getting these little subtle perceptions in, takes over and tries and tell you what it is. There's a guy, a research psychologist called Gonzaniga, who has published some interesting stuff just in the last few years about what he calls the left brain interpreter. And in split brain research, he's discovered that when stuff, subconscious stuff, and let me back up. I'm probably telling you too much about this guy because it could take up the rest of the hour. It's fascinating. Right brain perceptions oftentimes are interpreted by the left brain in a way that is actually inaccurate as far as what the perceptions were. But it makes perfect sense as far as the left brain analytic function is concerned. Okay? So in other words, the left brain, or the analytic function, wherever that resides, makes up stories based on the bits of information that come in through this perceptual channel that it isn't used to encountering or used to dealing with. That creates analytic overlay. These stories, these imaginations and things that come in and obscure the information you're getting. The example I always use is the Eiffel Tower. Let's say the remote viewer's target is the Eiffel Tower. And in the process of accessing the target, they get these little chunks and bits and pieces, crisscrossing metal girders, rivets, that kind of stuff, okay? There's not enough information there to resolve the target, but that doesn't dissuade the left brain from making its contribution. It's very eager to please, over-eager to please, and it says, let's see, where did I see something like that most recently? Oh, I know. It's the girder bridge over the Mississippi River when we crossed back on vacation. So the remote viewer says, oh, I know the target is a bridge. Now, it's not a bridge, it's the Eiffel Tower. But there are chunks of reality to that misapprehension that the analytic function of the brain jumps to. That is analytic overlay. There's a lot more to it, but that's good enough for now. Environmental overlay is when the remote viewer is in a room with bright orange carpet, and there's chimes in the corner, and the dog is barking, and somebody's got the TV on too loud next door, and they sit there and say, there's bright orange at the target, and the sound of bells, and they start pulling stuff unconsciously. It's unintentional, but that stuff filters in and it ends up in the remote viewing session. So environmental overlay is something we worry about. Inclemencies are things that are going on in the viewer's life. They're sick, they got a cold, their dog's been run over, the bills are due, his house has been repossessed, all of those things that tend to make things less than ideal. And so they're doing a remote viewing session, and that adds emotional turmoil, which can influence the course of the remote viewing session. Finally, telepathic overlay. We have no scientific evidence that exists, but we have a lot of remote viewing evidence that exists. That's where the remote viewer picks up on too strongly on the thoughts of the tasker or the thoughts of another remote viewer, and it bleeds over into the first remote viewer session and ends up distorting the information they get. And we can talk more about that later perhaps, but you get the idea. Okay, those are the things that get in the way of remote viewing, at least some of them. Now let's talk about what you have to have a good remote viewing session. There are some really strict things to keep in mind. or it really isn't remote viewing. First of all, the viewer has to be blind to the target. Who wants to tell me what blind means? You don't have to bring your seeing eye dog to the session, no. Yes, shout it out.
That you don't know what the target is.
You cannot know what the target is. That's right. Somebody said front loading. No front loading. Why is front loading bad? Somebody else volunteer. There's got to be bias. AOL, yes. Why what? Bias. You start off with everything you know about whatever that is you've been front loaded with. Now, KAL, no, it wasn't KAL. That was a different plane wreck. What was the one that went down in the Atlantic off of New York? TWA 800. TWA 800. Everybody and their dog wanted to remote view TWA 800. And so they started off by targeting TWA 800, knowing up front that that's what it was. Well, what is the problem with that? Well, our friend the left brain again, which has access to memory. All of those news reports you've read, all of the things you've seen on TV, all of the thoughts you've had about it, all the discussions you've had with your buddies at work, all of that stuff is just hanging out there waiting to be remembered. And when you know it's TWA 800, it's almost impossible to sort out what you get, whether it is in memory or whether it's what I say, real or Memorex. You know, it's very hard to sort out what is real data from what is not. And so front loading is highly problematic. There are people, and I think there's even people here in the audience today who think you can work front loaded. I have real doubts about that. If you can pull it off, great. That's great. But frankly, I haven't seen anybody pull it off yet. So if you can show me evidence that remote viewing front loaded provides you data, really good data that you did not have before and that is verified afterwards, I will be very impressed. Okay. Non-suggestive targeting, you can't pop up and say, it's a person and his name is Jack and he lives in, you know, that doesn't do any good. So how do you do that? Well, there are a lot of different approaches, some of which I'll talk about in a minute, but one of the more common ones is to give a coordinate. That may be just a geographic coordinate, or more often these days it's what we call an encrypted coordinate, which is just a number that is assigned to stand for that mission, that remote viewing mission. 8675309 equals the Eiffel Tower. Okay? Some of you are chuckling, you recognize that old song. That's dating you. Okay. Yeah, 8675309 equals the Eiffel Tower. Now, the viewer does not get the Eiffel Tower part of that. All the viewer gets is 8675309 and proceeds to describe what comes to mind when they use that coordinate. Okay? Obviously, there's a telepathic or some kind of element involved here for the viewer's subconscious to even have a clue that that number represents the mission of describing the Eiffel Tower. But again, there's a lot of research and talk to be done about that. Feedback is essential. It does a lot of things. Feedback accomplishes a lot of things. It provides closure to the session. It helps the viewer to learn from mistakes and things done right. It gives a kind of a learning loop there, and it does a lot of interesting and useful things that are essential to a good remote viewing. Now, there were a lot of operational remote viewings for which we never got any feedback, but those were after we had done this time after time after time after time and learned by doing the session, getting the feedback, comparing notes, seeing where we'd gone wrong, where we'd gone right, and doing that over and over and over again. And at some point when you get really experienced at it, you are more likely to do well on doing a targeting if you don't get feedback. But that's an operational issue we don't get into today further. And finally, known or ground truth. How many here are remote viewed aliens? Oh, come on, admit it. Come on. Okay. Okay. Now, do we know that what y'all got remote viewing aliens is true? You may think it's true, and I'm not denying that. You may think it's true, but can you prove that it's true to anybody else? Probably not. And in order to have a good, strong remote viewing session, you have to have ground truth, particularly when you're learning how to do this. Now, later on, it's fun to do stuff like that, you know, the moons of Ganymede or the Central Galactic Council or whatever, I don't know. It's fun to do that kind of stuff, but that is always speculative remote viewing. Let's coin a new term, speculative remote viewing, okay? Because you can't prove that that happened. You don't have the evidence, the hard evidence that you can go to some scientist and say, look, this is what I was tasked with. I had no front loading. I can prove I had no outside influence on my work, and yet this is what I came up with. And here's the evidence to show that this correlates with reality. You don't have that. I'm not saying don't do UFOs, don't do aliens or any of that stuff. Go ahead and do it if you want. but realize that it doesn't count in a scientific context or even an operational context as remote viewing. Okay? That's enough of that. I'm going to talk briefly about types of remote viewing. And this is kind of a mixed bag, and there's a lot more to be said about this, but I'm going to kind of skim over it. Outbound or beacon remote viewing is how it was done kind of up front. At first at SRI, they would send someone out to the target that was selected randomly, and then the remote viewer in a secure room would describe the location where these people were. And it was quite effective and it was very useful. The problem, of course, was if you want somebody to tell you what's inside a Soviet nuclear facility, it's very hard to get a guy in there to be the beacon. And if you could, you might as well just give him a camera and forget about remote viewing. So they came up with some other alternatives. And there, of course, none of them are on that slide because I'm talking about types of remote viewing. One was called coordinate remote viewing, and they used coordinates to task people. It has now become kind of redesignated as controlled remote viewing. But the coordinates can be used in other kinds of remote viewing as well. It's not just CRV where coordinates are used as a tasking mechanism. Associative remote viewing, there will be a number of speakers, I guess 3 speakers, that will be talking about ARV during the course of the conference. It's a way of reporting on the future and narrowing the chances of being wrong as much as possible. And I won't describe that further because you'll have an opportunity to hear about that later. Extended remote viewing is a way in which, well, is an approach to remote viewing. It's more of a meditative approach. The way it was done at Fort Meade, the viewer would lay down on a bed in a darkened room, try and attain a hypnagogic state. The monitor would come in and then debrief the viewer, give him a coordinate or whatever to get him to the target, and then ask questions and take notes. And then afterwards, the viewer might get up and do some drawings and stuff. Joe McMonigle used this approach at Fort Meade a lot. He does not really use it anymore. He's got other, he's moved on and developed other methodologies that are kind of intrinsic to him. But it's one way of doing it, and a lot of people like to do this approach. I always hated it because to me it was a way of ruining a good afternoon nap. Controlled remote viewing, of course, that's the kind I do. It's a little more structured. You sit at a table, you're fully conscious, at least as fully conscious as you ever get. You're sitting at a table, you're taking notes, drawing sketches and things like that. And I'm going to show you some examples of this later on. Controlled remote viewing, the way it was developed, consists of about 6 stages. And I'm not going to go through these in detail because we don't have the time. But very quickly, it starts off, you get the major concept of what the target is. Is it land, water, structure, event, life form, something like that. And then you deepen your contact by going for the sensories. What are the sensory things? Colors, textures, smells, tastes. Dimensional characteristics, you start sketching. You try and capture the dimensional feel of this thing to get an idea of what its structure is. Qualitative mental percepts when you get into more complex things. Use the example of the Eiffel Tower, where you start off, you start off, it's a structure, and then you go black, cold, hard, smooth, rough, speckled, whatever it is, and then you start actually doing a sketch of the Eiffel Tower. You might get some little crisscross things and some little rivet kind of things and all that kind of stuff. Then you get into stage 4. That's when you start talking about things like tourism, foreign, people here with cameras, park-like setting, and a little more complex kind of notions. 5, it takes too long to explain, so I'll skip that. 4, I call this last one 4-dimensional assessment. Ingo Swan, who with Hal Putoff developed this, called it 3-dimensional assessment. I call it 4-dimensional because you can deal with time to some degree in this. But that's where you actually make a model of the target out of some substance or other, like clay or whatever. So I'm going to show you an example of a CRV session here real quick. This is one I did a long time ago. You get an idea of what I'm talking about. This is one when I was training. It was in 1984. And you see it starts off with a coordinate. I get a thing called an ideogram, which is a kind of a reflexive mark that you make. And I got various different impressions. It was faceted, domed, shiny. There were arches, geometrical, broad hemispherical. I got traffic sounds, water nearby, exposed, looming, whatever. And it gave me an impression of a geodesic dome. Notice I've called AOL break. That means I knew that whatever it is reminds me of a geodesic dome, but I knew it wasn't one. Okay? I knew that was mental noise, and I'm trying to get rid of it, expel it at that point. Then I went on to stage 3, basically. No stage 2 some more. And I got some more AOLs. This thing it was big and round like this. You know, I couldn't quite capture that. It's cold, snowy, all that kind of stuff. I got a little sketch over here. This reminded me of the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. Also reminded me of the Taj Mahal or something about it, and reminded me of all those things. Am I talking too fast, by the way? That happens when, okay. Then, you know how in the movies you get these morph effects where things transform into something else? You kind of see that happening with this sketch. I'm fooling around with it, trying to figure out how these lines go together, okay? And I kind of get it. It looks a little bit like a Gothic hat of some kind, I don't know. But I'm trying to figure out how it all fits together. And then this was the final page of this session. And I got the impression, an AOL break impression sort of, that it was kind of a mosque or church feel. And I did this little sketch. Well, it turned out not to be too bad, actually, because that was the target. You kind of get a feel for, whoops, that doesn't do you much good, does it? That was the target. Okay. It was the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. And guess what? You see that mosque way back there? That's the Blue Mosque. So I wasn't too far afield, it turned out, on that session. So that was a lot of fun. Question everybody always asks is, does it really work? I have some more examples. I don't know how many I can give you in the time we have left, because I want to get on to something else.
Put the big word yes up there.
How many want to see more examples? More examples. All right, I'll do it quick. I'll show you that page. Lots of words. Never mind, it's not worth looking at. More words. Let me find the stuff that really matters in this session. This one here. You see the sketch there? I got an idea of some kind of ruins on a hill. Reminded me of the Alhambra in Spain. Remember, mental noise. I got this overhead view. There's a round thing made out of rocks like a tower on a castle. Circular ruins tower. This enclosed courtyard sort of thing. Enclosed room. Interior courtyard. Again, it reminded me of a Crusader fort or a Spanish mission. I just had this idea. I wasn't quite sure what it was. And I went in on, finally, I said some more things like that. When I ended up the target, this was the site. It was, I don't know if you've seen this in National Geographic, BAM, or BOM, I don't know, in where is it? Iran. So you can see the rounded parts and the enclosed courtyards and all that. I mentioned there's like third world domestic animals and stuff like that, and that turns out to be right, because although these are ruins, this is still inhabited area over here, and it's by herders and that sort of thing. Okay, BAM, B-A-M, it's in Iran. And if you have back issues of National Geographic, you can find it somewhere. Let's see. Let me show you what a more advanced session will look like. You got the sketches. I'll just show those briefly. And the idea of some kind of religious setting. And this kind of rounded notion of curved over dome-like thing. And just to prove that there actually was a handwritten part of it, there is what he said. Now here's something that's a little more legible. And is somebody who's a fast but clear reader want to read that? Please. Oh, wait a minute, you may not, I better do it because of the mic. I didn't think about that. Okay, oops, and you missed the top part. He says, target is a single outstanding building among several structures. It is different shape from the others, much more outstanding in character. Very rounded, while the others are not so much. They are located on a high plateau. AOL signal makes them feel like it's the Himalayas, maybe Nepal or Kathmandu. It's kind of mental noise that's kind of filtering in, but may have some legitimacy. In addition, the target is a Buddhist religious structure, very ancient and important. From an historical perspective, antedates Christianity. It's somehow pivotal in nature. Dome, complex shaped, red, golden, reddish orange, yellow predominate. Structure is hollow, interior is dim and smoky, numerous passageways, all that stuff. People involved in the site are monks, prayerful, reverent, obedient, chanting. Structures nearby are more rectangular. He goes on about some stuff like that. Well, the target is really quite interesting. First of all, he was right. It is Kathmandu, in Kathmandu. Okay, you got that part right. And the target is actually the Bodhnath Stupa, which is a Buddhist temple in a Buddhist monastery. And remember he said smoky? All these little things along here are butter lamps, yak butter lamps, so you got that kind of ambient, smoky light ambiance. Obviously a lot of monks here. So that gives you the level of detail that can come out in a good remote viewing session. Now obviously there are a lot of bad ones that happen. I mean, everybody blows a session every once in a while, or more often than that. And I didn't think it was worthwhile showing you some of those, So I'm just showing you these. Okay. I have more, but I think in the interest of time, I brought some books of session examples that maybe you can look at later on. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is how we got here. A lot of people say they don't care about the history of remote viewing, they just want to learn how to do it. Well, I think that's probably not a good perspective. If you don't know history, you don't know anything, you're a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree. It's important to know the history of remote viewing if you're going to do it, because you know what your context is. And it helps somewhat in the huge volume of claims made about remote viewing out there. It may help you kind of sort out the wheat from the chaff to some degree. Okay, first off, in the beginning, there was Ingo Swann. Everybody see that? That's Ingo. In front of his painting, the Millennium. That's a beautiful painting. It's like 22 feet long and 7 feet high in 3 sections, and whoa, man, it overwhelms you when you see it. And there was Hal Puthoff, which I hope I got this right side out. Now, take 2 guesses when this picture was taken. The only people who wear pants like that today are car salesmen. I hope there are no car salesmen in the audience, because I didn't mean you specifically, okay? Hal's on the end over here. This is Pat Price in the middle. Many of you have heard of Pat Price. And this guy is, I'll remember his name in a minute. Actually, probably didn't want me to say his name anyway. But he was a CIA. Kress, yeah, I think that's Ken Kress. Oh, is it Kit Green? Okay, I'm sorry, Kit Green. They're all way younger than they are now. Okay, anyway, this was an interesting glider-borne experiment, which was probably actually a good chance to use taxpayers' money to have fun, but we won't go into that. It was a successful experiment nonetheless. Okay, those two. Now, Ingo and Hal really were, you might say, the mutual fathers of modern remote viewing, or remote viewing per se. Now, I don't want you to think that they accomplished that in a vacuum, because there were a number of people, and some of them are present here today, that really aided and abetted that process and probably set the foundation that made it all happen. And I'll talk about them in a minute. But I think you can make a very strong argument that remote viewing, as we understand it today, would not have happened if these 2 guys hadn't, at the right point in history and in the right place and getting the right amount of attention, hadn't come together. Okay? There were just a lot of things coming together at the right time. And I'm not going to go into those, because that's also a very convoluted, but very fascinating story. Okay, one of our presenters today came along very shortly after these 2 came together and added an incremental addition, significant addition to this process, and that was Russ Targ. Russ, you're back there? Okay. This is Russ. He's looking much better now than he was back then, I'm sure. Right, Russ? Okay. Russ Targ, who contributed a great deal to the project, the remote viewing project. In fact, was co-author with Hal on MindReach, which is a classic work in the field, and has gone on to write a number of books, some of which are available out there today. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay, so I'm going to put up this timeline, and I'm afraid it didn't turn out very well, but we'll see what we get. Well, it's not working. Move it down a little bit. I'm trying to give you a feel for when people were associated with the program, and this is a bad slide. I'll have to explain it to you. Hal and Ingo kind of got together in 1972, and Hal presented a paper. Russ will probably tell you more about this, but Hal presented a paper at Lockheed, I think it was, and Russ came up afterwards and said, "Hey, I've been interested in this stuff for a long time. I want to get on board." So, I'm obviously paraphrasing Hesley. Don't kill me, Russell. But at any rate, he came on and was, and they worked together for a long time. In 1985, Hal left the project and went on to another adventure in Austin, Texas. Ingo stuck with the project for 85 or 86. This is all, by the way, at SRI International, formerly Stanford Research Institute, out in California. This was the research part of this thing. Russ Targ was on, I think, sometime in 73, if I remember right. I didn't stop to check these facts out completely because I was in a hurry. And he was with the project till like 83, 84, somewhere in that time frame, as I recall. They kind of set the stage. Now, I don't want to say that they're by themselves either. There were a lot of really talented people that worked with them. We just don't have time to talk about today. I just want to pick up who I can in discussing this. But as the research project progressed and other people got interested in the program or in the notion of remote viewing, trying to exploit it as some sort of adjunct or add-on to intelligence collection. The CIA was heavily involved. And you'll probably have heard some of these names. This is trying to set the perspective. Scan8 was what the CIA called their program. program part of the time. Gondola Wish was the early Army program, who Skip Atwater. I have a picture of Skip here. Skip Atwater, who will be talking to us. Oh, I cut off part of his head. He probably needed that. Okay. Skip Atwater was instrumental in starting that first Army program, Gondola Wish. Then it became Center Lane. General Bert Stubblebine had a major role in that, and also one of our presenters. Oh dear, I haven't got these in the best of order, but this will work. Here he is appearing with Hal, is John Alexander, who's going to talk to us later on this afternoon. Okay. John was very instrumental working with Stubblebine in promoting this agenda that the Army Intelligence Security Command had at the time of seeing what human potentials could do to enhance intelligence and enhance the Army. Now, I missed the bet. I should have had the other picture that shows John holding up a pencil bent in a pretzel shape, you know. And of course, that was more Jack Houck's purview, so I skipped just as well I didn't, I guess. After Center Lane, it became Sunstreak, and that was when DIA picked it up. And it was finally known, oh, I got an extra S in there. Anybody need an extra S? Oh, sorry. It became Stargate. Notice 2 words, both capitalized, Stargate, which is what the program was finally known as when it was revealed to the public. So everybody calls it Stargate these days. But it actually, that was one of the later and most shortly used names for the project. It's a convenient way to refer to it, and it got that kind of cool sound, Stargate. But it was really known by these other names for much longer, for the most part. Okay. Now let me talk about what happened concurrently and after the SRI days. Now we're talking about mostly the military viewers, and these are the guys who you've probably heard the most from. Now I've got Put-Off Swan and Targ here to kind of show you where they fit in to the picture in general. And, gosh, well, part of Joe's didn't get on there. That arrow was supposed to point at another little bar going off the edge, because when Joe retired from the Army, he went on to pursue remote viewing in other venues. And let me show you a picture of Joe. You all probably seen him before. Well, that didn't turn out too bad. He emailed me this as an attachment, so I didn't know how it was going to look on the screen. He's a happy-looking guy. Just don't tell him the wrong thing at the wrong time. You could be sorry. No. Okay. Skip Atwater, I've already showed you his picture. He started the project, essentially. They gave him a major to keep him company, but he didn't really need him. He started the project in 1977 and was with it up until 1988. Mel Riley, this is hard to see. See, I put these contrasting bars in here so you can distinguish them. I didn't know they were going to wash out so bad. The other ones I think are a little more clear. Mel is the only guy who left the project and then got reassigned again. He was on board up from here, what's that, 79 roughly till around 82, had a long break, came back in 86, and then retired in 1990. I have a picture of Mel. Anybody here want to see Mel? Yes. No, put your hand down, Mel. You don't have to see him. Okay, there's Mel Riley. Oh, he's lost some of his head too. Too bad, okay. Okay, Mel Riley. Okay, I'm on here. You know what I look like, I hope. If not, you've been asleep and shame on you. Okay, I was on from 83 until 1990. Thank you. Now I've got, let me put this like this. In 1984, starting actually I think the late 70s, early 80s, Hal and Ingo were working on a way of transferring remote viewing skill, the ability to do it. Okay, not the innate capacity, but the skill set or whatever that would help people be remote viewers without having the long, laborious, talent search that usually went on. Okay, so they came up with this thing called CRV that we've already talked about. And in '84, the government sent 5 of us, 1 and then 4, to train with Ingo in this CRV methodology. And you see some of them here, and that's a lousy slide. Fortunately, the ones that you can't see the best are the ones that got their faces blotted out because they're still not public. Okay, we have here Ingo. We have someone here who has all his hair. Isn't that amazing? I don't know how that happened. And that slide is kind of scraggled out. This is sort of, you can't see it, that's young Ed Dames when he looked like a teenager, okay? We had a lot of fun. He acted like a teenager too. So anyway, we're going to get in front of Ingo's painting. He took that picture with a Polaroid, that's why it turns out so bad. It's interesting, back when we should have taken all kinds of pictures, this is a black program, you didn't even have a camera in your house, you don't like to take pictures of anything. Okay. Partway through 1984, Lynn Buchanan came on board. His bar starts about here and goes off the edge there. Here's a picture of Lynn. He doesn't look a day older than that, I guarantee you. Boy. And he's around here somewhere. I hope he's sitting down. He's looking a little faint earlier. Okay. There's Lynn Buchanan. He left the program. He retired in 1992, as I recall, from 84 to 92. And then there's, of course, Ed Dames. You can see here. Now, this little bar here, that I have to explain, he was not assigned to unit at that time, but he was assigned to us for training. So, we'd alternate. Every 2 weeks we'd go to New York or California to be trained in CRV. And Ed accompanied us on that trip, on those trips. And so that shows the reflect that he's there, but not officially there as far as the Army is concerned. And then in 86, he was assigned to us, became a project officer, became a training officer, and generally, supported the operations, a little remote viewing himself. And he left to go to another black project, which I won't tell you anything about because it probably deserves to be, in, 1986, about June. Now, let's see, let me show you a picture of Ed. Here's Ed. This is also later. He looks much more serious now. Okay. All of us do, or we look seriously bad. I'm not sure which it is. Okay, now I don't have pictures of most of the rest of these guys. I showed you John Alexander. Dave Morehouse, he was there from June of 88 to June of 1990. I have a picture of him. He kind of set things on their end as far as remote viewing is concerned. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the other people who were involved in it but weren't directly involved with the program. And I'm only going to talk about the people I have pictures about. I'm sorry. One of whom is our very own Stephen Schwartz, who is here and will present to us following my presentation. And he's been involved in remote viewing and things related to remote viewing and various parapsychology research and stuff from, I don't even know how far back he goes, I think into the 60s. Where's Stephen? Is he out there somewhere? He's out probably zenning out for his presentation. I think he was involved, I know he was involved in the early 70s, and he actually had a dialogue going on with SRI, with Hal and Russ and all those guys, and contributed quite a bit to their research effort. A submarine, for example, that's no little thing to contribute, right? Set up an experiment with Ingo and with Hella Hamid, in which they did a remote viewing for 500 feet deep in the ocean, proving that the phenomenon cannot be electromagnetically based, which is an interesting thing to prove. Okay, now Jack Hauk, who's here today as well, he looks very pleased with that. Are you always that pleased, Jack? Okay, yeah, okay, good. Jack has done some remote viewing research from what I understand. I don't know as much about his history as I do some of these other folks. But, it's interesting because he played a significant role in getting Bert Stubblebine and John Alexander interested in this stuff and moving along with his PK parties and stuff. He's going to do that tomorrow for us. He's done some research in paranormal phenomena. In fact, I think a fair amount. And he's going to talk to us tomorrow about some of that. Now, excuse me. Also presenting is Angela. I don't want to talk about Angela yet. I messed up. I'll come back to you, Angela. I promise. There's another timeline I want to show you, because people are kind of confused about this too. That's crooked again, isn't it? Okay, I tried to capture what happened to some degree, and it's not all here. I guarantee it's not all here. In 1989, Ed Dames decided there needed to be a way to commercialize remote viewing in the unclassified arena. So he started a company called SciTech, and asked all of us, some of whom were still in the remote viewing project, some of whom had graduated from it, so to speak. He asked us if we would like to participate as part-time consultants or whatever, and most of us agreed to it. Mel and myself and Lynn and even Dave Morehouse were at the organization meeting, and we started off and went with that for a while. At different times we split off, went to do our own things. Dave Morehouse and Ed had a falling out. I don't know, it was 1994 or something like that. Lynn started his company. I put down here Lynn as 96, is that right? You started PSI in 92? Okay, well, whatever. Anyway, he started, huh? Okay, you were only teaching people, those in the government who knew about it in 92. Okay, good. You weren't commercial at that point then, is what you're saying. Well, you weren't commercial in the public sense. Okay, all right, cool. Well then, when I retired, and Lynn helped me out a bit with this, with some suggestions and stuff, I started my own company. We hope those continue. They don't have an end point. They're supposed to keep on going to the next timeline, okay? Just recently, Ed Dames has left SciTech, and he is represented, or not he, but SciTech is represented by, I happen to have her picture, so I'm going to show it to you. Joni Dorff. Are you out there, Joni? I haven't met you yet. Is she here yet? Maybe she hasn't got in. Okay, Joni Dorff. And Angela Thompson Smith, who is one of the major workers and organizers of this conference, she isn't directly in the lineage of the government remote viewers either, but she has had quite a good background in parapsychology research and has gotten very heavily involved in remote viewing since and has her own organization doing it as well. And of course, everyone wonders what happens to Ingo. He declines to come to anything like this. We pleaded and begged, he wouldn't do it. But just to show you that he is still alive, I'm sure that's all you wanted to know. I had my picture taken to prove it, and there's the date right there, okay, down in October. This is a new painting he's got, which I think is really quite spectacular. Okay, good. I'm running real short on time, so I'm just going to very quickly suggest a couple of books, which are not here for sale. We'll have to see what we can do about that. Remote Viewers, if you haven't read that, I highly recommend you read it for background. It's an extremely good book. And of course, there's another classic, Joe McMonigle's Mind Trek. Joe has a new book out called Remote Viewing Secrets, which is just hot off the presses. I couldn't find it in any bookstore in Austin yet. Here's a picture of it, or here's a copy of it right here. Those of you who can see, I'm not going to enlarge this because I can't. But anyway, I'm sure he'll let you look at it. Wayne Carr will let you look at it. Here's the book. I know you can't write this down this fast, sorry. Here's the book that is must reading for everybody. Conscious Universe by Dean Radin. It is the most readable address of the science of parapsychology, which underlays all of this stuff. It's extremely important to read, in my opinion. Do we have time to talk about this? We're going to have to. Okay, where do we go from here? I've talked about the before, I've talked about the now. I'm going to want to talk about where we're going from here now. In the interest of time, I'm going to make it quick. Last year at the first annual conference, International Remote Viewing Association was founded with many of the characters that you'll see here today. There is, Hal's not here today, but he's in the picture. John Alexander, Lynn Buchanan, Russ Targ, Stephen Swartz, me, Skip Atwater, Angela, and Marcello Truzzi, who will be here tomorrow as an advisor to us. So IRVA was formed. The idea of trying to bring some structure to the field of remote viewing, because it's all over the map right now. And the idea is not necessarily just impose order. I mean, Darth Vader says, we'll impose order on the universe, you know. We don't want to impose order in that way. The idea of IRVA is to try and organize things a little bit so that we can go on beyond that and bring remote viewing into the mainstream and get it to work, you know, in a way that will convince people that where it becomes useful, it can be operationally successful on a large scale. Anybody here know what synergy means? Who can tell me what synergy means? I don't have time to ask you what synergy means. Okay, things you end up with, this is my rough attempt at a definition. Process or relationship that brings about greater result, often in ways that you could not ever have expected. We're hoping through IRVA to achieve some synergy. There's a lot of organizations out there pursuing parapsychology research. And this is just, some of those names I probably got wrong because I did this at midnight in a hurry and I didn't stop to check them out. But this is just a small sampling of people out there trying to sort this all out. And we really think that remote viewing is a major step forward in this process, or at least I do. I'm speaking for myself here, I guess I should say. And I see IRVA and the other things we're doing like these conferences as a way of bringing remote viewing out, and then ultimately we hope to integrate with everybody else who's trying to do these kind of things. I hope we have some success at that. Well, finally, I don't think this applies to many of you, but I think there's a lot of people out there who are going to feel this way when we get to that point. Okay. The answer is, yeah, as Skip said, remote viewing really does work. And I hope at least my presentation here has given you some food for thought, and maybe straighten out some confusions you had or confirm some things you already knew. At this point, I'm going to close, and we'll start up here in just a few minutes with Stephen Schwartz. Thank you.